Move along, move along, move along. I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the building the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
Were you covered? Were you hit with debris?
No. But I mean, I was ducked behind a subway cover. So I put with the jacket over, the 3 of us, all of us huddled together. There was, dust and whatnot everywhere, but it was...
The second building has just come down. The second, everyone's being asked to get down. Come down.
Can't even look at it. Because all I can see are people. I don't see a building, I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
If you're just joining us, you probably already know the World Trade Center towers, the Twin Towers, the New York landmarks have collapsed and are gone. The Pentagon has been hit by an airplane, a series of hijackings apparently today at the root of this. What we know is hundreds, if not thousands, are injured, no count on the deceased yet, and that the investigation, a massive investigation, is just beginning to unfold.
But John, I stepped aside there, among other things, the moment to try to get some sort of sense from people who talk to, because as soon as this happens, people begin to think about a response. And we don't expect a response to come in the immediate future by any means. But I was just talking to Charlie Gibson from Good Morning America, and he'd been thinking about the same thing, that the response to this from the United States is going to have to be massive. They have to accomplish something in some way, because so much of the response to terrorism before by a large nation such as this, which is not impotent but very limited in its capacity to operate at this kind of level. You were mentioning earlier the attacks against Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan. In retrospect, they spent, as you pointed out, more than $1 million per cruise missile. I forgot how many they sent. No, they didn't get anything. They didn't get anything. They didn't do anything. So it's an enormous challenge for a powerful nation to respond in an effective way. And the Pentagon is still burning, and today the World Trade Center towers have gone. Diane Sawyer is down in Times Square at the moment, and among other things, I think has been trying to get some grasp of the number of casualties involved. It must be very difficult, Diane.
It's impossible, Peter, no matter how many people you call. And of course, no matter what the facts we get now, one can only imagine what the facts will be later. I want to give you a sense of what it's like here in Times Square right now. Because if you look outside, we have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people standing outside, just stopping still, a kind of respectful witness, looking up at the screens where we're broadcasting the pictures. They can't hear the sound. They are simply looking at the wordless horror and standing to show, in a way, respect. And I want to show you something else, because people have been sent home from Times Square, and across the way, the construction workers who were building the Toys R Us building next door to us just hung their signs outside. God bless America, and pray for families and victims. And we can only, of course, add to that as crisply as we try to report what's happening here today, we join them. And this is not just another story, even for reporters who've been trained to do this for so long. A few things to add since this morning. We were on the air, of course, live when suddenly we get word of that first explosion at the World Trade Center, the first building. And initially, of course, we didn't know if it was an accident. We didn't know what had happened. And then we were on the air live when the second plane came in and the second plane hit. And I want to show you now. This is what we were seeing live on the air. And as you've expressed before, Peter, the combination of disbelief and horror and simple prayer for somebody to save the people who were inside that building is all anybody can do, as an entire network is broadcasting live something so unimaginable. I have talked, as you all have, and as George Stephanopoulos reported, to the people who were inside as these scenes were taking place. We now see the first collapse, which of course took place about 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And then it would be about 28 minutes later that we would see the second collapse of the second building. And while we're watching the scene, each person desperate to stop this tape and go and do something. All we can do is relive the horror each time we see it. I have talked to people who are inside the building, one of them Fran Martin, who is the aunt of someone who works here at ABC, and she was saying that the first experience inside the building was that earthquake-like feeling a number of people have mentioned, and then something else in an eerie, silent, kind of mournful foliage. You saw paper just wafting out in all directions, and it was so mysterious to everyone. They couldn't imagine what had happened. The paper was scattering, and we've now read some 3 miles out, way across the river, the paper from those floors. As they came down the stairs, we're told that people were remarkably calm, were remarkably respectful of each other as they were making their way down, even though a number of them had lived through that bombing 8 years ago. A number of them remembered what it was when the bomb went off in the basement of the World Trade Center. And of course, as we now know, if the cyanide gas had not vaporized in those bombs, that it would have been a cataclysm even beyond what was experienced then. So they could all relive it as they were making their way down. Now we're watching the scenes as the building is collapsing and people are running from it. People are covered with this kind of spectral suit from the building's collapse itself. I want to point out again, and you've talked about it too, Peter, all the firefighters were immediately called on duty. All the firefighters immediately raced in from wherever they were to help out, all the emergency medical service personnel. This was a great display of human concern and human consideration. And you've mentioned before, we have this report that 200 firefighters are now missing, and yet they have done everything they can. Every hospital is open, every hand is on deck, every doctor is standing by in the city of New York with all this courage and struggle and still heartbreak out there in the streets right now. So that's it from Times Square, Peter.
Thank you very much, Dan. I remember working with Diane on the Millennium broadcast on New Year's Eve 2000. Diane had such a joyful time in Times Square. It is, whatever you think of New York in general, it is a place where people from around the world gather to express themselves. And so we'll go back there on occasion to get some, you really get some sense of the world in Times Square. And President Bush has been on the phone today to a variety of world leaders, clearly discussing this with them at the highest possible level. And perhaps they're all as confused as the rest of us are as to what has happened, who perpetrated these acts of terrorism in the United States, and what is to be done in response. Though this is perhaps, we're only 4 hours since this actually happened, and perhaps it is not quite the time to begin to think about the precision of a response, but a response will be required of some magnitude that will mean something from the United States if one is ever able to pin down exactly who the perpetrators were. We told you that the President was in Florida this morning, where he'd intended to talk about education today and was coming back to Washington. He's made it as far as Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he landed about an hour and a bit ago, just before noon Eastern time, where he's made a statement to the cameras, which we haven't got our hands on yet. But the President said that freedom had been attacked, but freedom will be defended. And the President is in touch with his national security team. Ann Compton, ABC's Ann Compton, who covers the White House for us for many years from us, tells us that jet fighters accompanied Air Force One, and that as best we can tell, the Air Force One was flying at a particularly high altitude. There are no planes taking off or landing or taking off in the United States at the moment, with the exception of Air Force One, though the Federal Aviation Administration says at the moment that 50 known aircraft, this is actually a few minutes old, 50 known aircraft are all in the sky within approximately 50 miles of their destination. So you can feel across the country that aircraft that were in flight are beginning to settle down. They were ordered to settle down by the FAA and to land at the nearest possible airport. And so that has begun to work out. Now, in Washington, I think Claire Shipman at the White House or near it has some further information about the president. Yes, Claire.
Well, that's right, Peter. Essentially, what we've learned is what he told the pool cameras a few minutes ago, and we're hopefully going to see in just a few minutes, but he said that he and this government have taken steps to ensure the functioning of the United States government, that the U.S. military is on high alert at home and abroad. He said he has taken all appropriate security measures to protect Americans. He says freedom itself has been attacked and freedom will be protected. And finally, he also said he will hunt down and punish those responsible for this. Again, we're hoping to see him in person, but as you mentioned, it looks as though this may be the secure place that they've decided on for the president, at least temporarily, Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I'd be really curious, Claire, and I realize how difficult it is at the moment, whether or not there's not pressure, political pressure in Washington from the members of the president's own staff and cabinet for him to show up soon in front of the country and assure them beyond his statement that freedom has been attacked and freedom will be defended, of course, because it wasn't defended this morning.
Well, I think
whether or not the president to be seen in command in a more vigorous way.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm sure it's a delicate balance right now between the Secret Service and those who are trying to protect the president, keeping him out of sight and someplace secure, and his political advisors who would clearly like to see him make a statement. You saw how quickly he did it this morning, as brief as it was, and certainly a piece of tape that we're going to see in a few minutes, we hope, is not what they would like to see the president doing right now. They would like to see him making something of a more formal statement. But again, it could be a number of hours before the president is back in Washington and prepared to talk to us from that forum.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. We'll come back to you anytime you want. And again, none of us should be surprised at what's happening. First of all, Secret Service is a huge, powerful, authoritative organization which takes the president's safety and other members of the senior political leadership with deep and profound seriousness, but they have enormous power. And so if you're talking between a senior political official and the president, a Secret Service official of equal stature at the moment, who's going to win that argument at the moment? And this is particularly true in a situation which continues to unfold, because while the devastation, perhaps the greatest devastation has occurred in New York City this morning, it's also occurred outside Washington at the Pentagon, and the tension is there all across the country, because not only were the United Nations and various government buildings evacuated here in New York City, but the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest skyscrapers in Boston and Cleveland and Minneapolis, and the Space Needle in Seattle. So the psychological effect on people in the country is huge. It may indeed be settling down after several hours, but the president and his response to this is also part of the psychological package, because the country looks to the president on occasions like this to be reassuring to the nation. Some presidents do it well, and some presidents don't. But ABC's Ann Compton is with the president at the moment, and we have her on the telephone. Annie.
Peter, it has been a frightening couple of hours for President Bush. We took off in Air Force One from Florida, where he first got word of this, and we literally, Peter, have been flying at well over 40,000 feet west, the White House unable to tell us where we were headed or how long it would take. There were jet fighters off the wing just out of our sight until we landed. And the president has spent the time on board the aircraft talking not only to world leaders but to the vice president, to his cabinet. He even checked in with Mrs. Bush, trying to get more information. We were high enough so that the Air Force was actually able to get some television signal. We don't know much about what's gone on the ground, but he has been able to see some of it on a very fuzzy television picture. We landed here at Barksdale Air Force Base. This is near Shreveport, Louisiana, at about 11:45 Eastern Time. We were not allowed to use cell phones or give you any indication of where we were until local people noticed the plane on the ground. The president has just made a statement, Peter, a very emotional one, saying that freedom has been attacked, but freedom will be defended, saying that America's military is on its highest state of alert. World leaders have been assured that the U.S. will do whatever it takes to protect America and Americans. Frankly, Peter, I thought the president not only looked grim, very solemn, but his eyes looked somewhat red.
Annie, let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, the president was on a education trip, ostensibly, in Florida today. How much of the national security team was with him?
This is actually a skeleton team with him on a short, it was a trip that lasted only about 24 hours. He was just making his last appearance before returning to Washington. And Karl Rove, one of his senior counselors, is with him, and his press secretary, Ari Fleischer, but none of the national security apparatus, such as Condoleezza Rice, who would ordinarily travel with the president on a more substantive trip. But on Air Force One, of course, he has the full resources of communications. But he does not have the full team with him.
Well, let's talk about this for a second, because when the president took off from Florida and went immediately to 40,000 feet, and I believe actually got a fighter escort for part of the way, it reminds one a little bit of what it was like in the Cold War, because the Cold War, there was always a provision that the senior members of the government, president included, could in fact run the country from a command center in the sky. Is that basically what's happening this morning?
Absolutely. In fact, the U.S. used to have 5 aircraft, now Air Force One. Let me know if we're being taken out of here. We may be scrambled out of here.
Okay.
Are we leaving? Okay, Peter, we are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea. They have not told us. They have kept us. We don't even know whether we'll be able to see the president or travel with him, but we are told that he's been traveling. He will continue. They are still quite worried about his own security.
Off you go, and Ann, thanks very much for a very, very full report on the state of, and perhaps even a little bit of the mental condition of the president at the moment. And we cannot state it often enough. The country looks to him, and so he may have stopped at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, which is just where Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana all come together at an Air Force base out of the way, and he may be safe at 40,000 feet in Air Force One, but before long the country is going to expect him to be back in Washington to send, if not only a message, not just a message to those of us in the nation who look to the president for some sense of political national stability, but also to the other parts of the world where these enemies of the United States, with whom we've talked quite a lot about today, at the moment must surely think they have the United States on the run to some extent. And while the Taliban, the political leadership, political, military, religious leadership in Afghanistan said this morning that they condemned this and had nothing to do with it, and it could not have been Osama bin Laden, because he wasn't sophisticated enough to do it. It had to be a country or a government, certainly. And while the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, came out and put as much distance as they could between them and the Palestinian people, this acted in the Palestinian people, the president needs to be on station to talk it. As does the mayor of New York, and Mayor Giuliani is with us at the moment. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
I can, Peter.
Mr. Mayor, I saw you several times on the street today, and it looked like you were deeply sharing the horror that all of us feel. But I'd really appreciate, aside from, on top of your sentiments about all this, give us some sense of what's going on.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort. We have thousands of police officers and firefighters in all of Manhattan trying to rescue as many people as we possibly can. There are still a lot of people there that are injured, hurt, dazed, and we're trying to get them out, and we're mobilizing all of our fire, police, and emergency resources to do that. The governor has alerted the National Guard, and they're being deployed to come and relieve us early to later this afternoon. And the urban search and rescue teams are coming here from around the country to also assist us. But until then, which means until probably 2, 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon, our police department, our fire department, and our emergency people are being stretched to the limit. And I'm sure we've also lost a significant number of them.
Now, you're reluctant, I assume, to put any other name attached to the casualties except significant. Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't. I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10, 15 minutes. Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management? No, I went down to the scene, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
My question is, the Office of Emergency Management headquarters, into which you put enormous effort for coordination in a disaster like this, has it been damaged? Is it still operating? It's gone?
It's been damaged. I don't know how badly. And right now, that whole area of Manhattan, including the police department, which is another area we would operate from, City Hall, is another area we would operate from, have been closed off. So we've moved to a secure location in Midtown Manhattan where we're operating city government.
Is it fair to say, do you think, that all of your drills for dealing with terrorism and disaster are going according to plan, or has this been of such of magnitude that we've just all been caught totally off balance?
Oh, there's no question we were all caught totally off balance. No one could possibly expect large airplanes to crash into the World Trade Center the way this happened. I think, having said that, as I watched what the police officers and the firefighters were doing, I think they're going to save the maximum number of lives you could possibly save in a situation like this. I mean, the emergency efforts that they've been going through over the last 2.5 hours are nothing short of inspiring.
And when the National Guard comes in to say, did you say to take over or offer some relief, what can the National Guard do that you cannot do at a city level?
Oh, at this point, what they can do is relieve men who are going to be exhausted physically and emotionally.
Now, just if you would, because I know how busy you are, just give us some sense of what you thought at the time about all this.
I thought that I would never live to see anything like this. I didn't think anything like this was possible. When I first arrived there, I rushed down there from Midtown Manhattan, and I saw the first building that had been crashed open. And when you look at it, it takes you a minute to really comprehend that this is actually happening. And to see people jumping from the top of the World Trade Center, I mean, I don't think I've ever had a nightmare that's worse than this.
And we want to break in locally here in Washington to also bring you up to date on what's been going on here in the nation's capital as a result of this horrific sequence of events here in the United States. I'm Kathleen Matthews.
And I'm Del Walters. We are receiving some numbers right now of the number of injuries that are taking place as a result of what happened at the Pentagon this morning. You're looking at videotape right now. It happened at approximately 10 o'clock this morning, and then at about 11:15, the facade of the Pentagon collapsed. We know now that 26 people have been admitted to Virginia Hospital Center. We do not know the nature of their injuries or the severity of their injuries. In addition, we are being told another 7 people have been taken to Washington Hospital Center with burns.
That's right. We want to give you a phone number because I think there are a lot of folks who are very concerned that maybe they know passengers who were on board any one of these flights that has been crashed into a building as a result of these terrorist attacks. American Airlines actually has put out this number that you can call 1-800-245-0999. I guess that's a general number for any of the airlines that might have been involved in this. 1-800-245-0999. They're very difficult still to get information out of places like the Pentagon because, of course, most federal buildings, all federal buildings in the area, including the Pentagon, have been evacuated as a result of this. There have been reports of people who died in that Pentagon attack, but we have no confirmation of that at this point.
And we also know that one of the planes involved was a flight that originated out of Dulles. It was an American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757. There were 58 passengers on board. We don't have information yet as to the names of those passengers, but you saw the American Airlines number. That is the number that you call if you're seeking information with regards to that particular plane. We believe that that was one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. It originated out of Dulles.
Now, all of the airports across the country have been shut down. You saw National Airport there. They were shut down right away. Dulles, we understand, will remain closed until 11 o'clock tomorrow. There is no air transport going on at all in the United States or Canada. We want to bring you up to date now on some closings that have been going on, obviously, because this has really shut down the Washington area.
It is a long list. We're going to read them for you in case you're listening, but they are on your screen as well. Arlington County schools will be open. Prince George's County schools closing 2 hours early, so you need to make arrangements to pick up your loved ones. D.C. public schools at this hour, even though we understand it is still being debated, remain open. Montgomery County schools will be closing an hour and a half early. Edison Friendship Public Charter School closing at 12:30.
Okay, we want to move now to Charles County, Loudoun County and Alexandria. These further out, of course, from the nation's capital, and all of those remain open. In terms of private schools throughout the area, we understand many have been closed, and you need to check with your local school. Generally, they do follow a specific policy that coordinates with the public schools. Now, here are the university closings. American University is closed. The University of Maryland in College Park is open. The University College campus is closed. George Washington University is closed. Catholic University is closed. And UDC is closed.
And this perhaps goes without mention, but D.C. schools, and I'm sure this goes for the other school systems as well, are saying that if you are concerned about the safety of your loved ones, by all means go and pick them up. My wife picked up our children, so it's understandable that everybody is shaken by what has happened today. It has never happened before. You saw the other closings there. Also, we have some metro closings. The metro station at Union Station, at the Pentagon, understandably, and at National Airport are all closed. The yellow line will be switching routes to necessitate and to facilitate the evacuation of the district that is taking place, as all federal government buildings have been ordered closed by order of the president himself.
This is an incident that's been compared to Pearl Harbor already. I was talking to a congressman on Capitol Hill who said Washington will never be the same. Obviously, this is of great concern also to families and to children, and something that families need to talk about and try to calm their families and their children about. The mayor is actually going to be holding a press conference. It was scheduled for 1 o'clock, but because of all the gridlock downtown, it's been postponed a bit. As soon as that news conference, which will bring us up to date on what's happening in the city itself, comes about, we will bring that to you, if we can, live.
And understand, as we continue our coverage, we are going to break in and out of coverage of ABC. But just a reminder, we survived Oklahoma City, we survived Columbine, we will survive this as well, and we will try and help you through it.
Thanks very much for joining us. We'll join you probably every half hour. Meantime, we go back to Peter Jennings.
To try to appraise the number of casualties that have been that have occurred in the World Trade Centers in their related area. But bear in mind that about 50,000, what did I say, Nancy, 50,000 people work in the trade towers, 80,000 people perhaps work in the adjoining areas. We've seen them in flight, and we have seen not one but two towers absolutely collapse upon themselves. And elsewhere in the country, we're still uncertain. There's still an unknown number of aircraft who've been ordered to land that haven't managed to get down to the ground. We're not absolutely certain that there are any aircraft on missions, if you will, which are unaccounted for, despite the fact there was a report some time ago that the aircraft which crashed outside Pittsburgh may have been on its way to Camp David. I emphasize that that's reporting of which we're absolutely not very sure at all. But ABC's Barry Serafin is at the Capitol at the moment, and we've been told for some time that the Senate leadership there was going to be sent to a secure location. Do you have a current status report, Barry?
Well, Peter, we're not sure exactly what we're seeing here, but a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, a military helicopter landed here behind me on the west lawn of the White House. And then a large group of people were seen to walk out to it, get on board, and fly right above us, over the mall in the direction of the Pentagon, perhaps. My guess, and it's only a guess at this point, is that these were members of the Senate leadership and the House leadership, and perhaps members of the intelligence committees on their way to a briefing to try to figure out what in the world is going on today.
Were you able to walk up around the hill?
No, Peter, we, like everybody else, have been kind of pushed off of the hill. They've got a cordon for blocks now around the Capitol. In effect, they've sanitized that area. So we're about 4 blocks from the foot of the hill here.
And do you have any sense was there a sense of anticipation there? People sort of waiting for something to happen at the Capitol?
Well, there is. Every time any kind of aircraft shows itself, and there haven't been many, there have been a few government helicopters moving around, all eyes turn to the sky, as you might imagine.
Precisely, Barry. Thanks very much. Barry Serafin, who's up at the Capitol. One of the things that is absolutely certain at the moment, which is to say that the chain of command in the country is very much in place. So you can just imagine yourself in some other country at the moment trying to anticipate, maybe even exhilarating at what's happening in the United States at the moment, and having some belief that you've disrupted everything. President's at 40,000 feet, just about to take off from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. We don't know where he's going, but I have to assume he's going to go to Washington. Cannot have the president being seen to be running around the country. By the way, the baseball games have all been postponed today. The entire Major League Baseball schedule has been postponed for today, as much as a mark of mourning and sadness for what happened in a variety of locations today. U.S. Earlier on evacuated embassies around the world. They're all quite familiar with that, because on any number of occasions in the course of a year, you hear us say on the news that the State Department or the Pentagon has ordered a worldwide alert because something is going to happen, or potentially going to happen. There's some kind of terrorist attack that's going to occur in some part of the world. The most recent terrorist alert, ironically, was in Asia over last weekend. In Japan and in South Korea, American embassies were put on alert because somebody somewhere in the military, in the intelligence establishment believed there was some potential for an attack. And it's something government has to do. It's something government has to do. Government has no choice, it argues. A lot of times you'll hear people saying, well, they've put up a state of alert again and nothing happened, and so they just do it all the time. It's very hard on Americans traveling overseas to be somewhere where there's a state of alert. But as John McWethy, who covers the military establishment for us, points out, is something government is obliged to do, lest something ever happened and there had not been an alert. John, are you there? John McKenzie? John McWethy?
John McWethy's here.
Yeah, John, I'm sorry. I was you. I was obviously talking about not John McKenzie. This is I guess what one notices more than anything else today. This was a place where there was no terrorism alert. Nobody, I gather, that you've talked today seemed to know anything.
One of the things that they have been studying so scrupulously over the last several months is how Osama bin Laden and other terrorist groups operate, Peter. They felt that they had some ability to monitor critical communications from these groups. I think it's going to be proved that the groups have learned some very important and deadly lessons from past terrorist events and the way the U.S. has been able to monitor them. It seems quite clear in this instance that they bypassed the normal methods of communicating and were able to organize this very complex operation in a way that basically escaped American detection.
But John, I'm sorry, but I think a lot of Americans will hear you talking and be reminded that how often the government tells us how much more sophisticated it is and how much better able they are to monitor all this.
They are able to better monitor it, Peter, but every time, and you and I know this because we have had conversations with high-ranking government officials about how much detail we put on the air. Every time the news media puts on these details, it helps the terrorists to understand the way that our government goes about monitoring their communications. Oftentimes, those communications intercepts are very sophisticated, but the terrorists are clearly adjusting.
John, I wonder, by the way, on a slightly different subject, in terms of today's disaster, whether you picked up reports of U.S. aircraft carriers being sent to New York Harbor to help in some way, maybe even to be floating platforms?
I have not picked that up, Peter, but basically I'm standing on a highway at this point, so I'm not exactly plugged in.
I appreciate that, John, and we benefit tremendously from your knowledge, so thanks very much. Come back at us when you think of something else you'd like to contribute. We talk about, the United States and Canada cooperated today in closing down the airports. A reminder to us that all Canadian airports, or most Canadian airports, at least major Canadian airports, are very close to the U.S. border. We learned just a short while ago that Israel today, the United States and Israeli relationships so very close, closed all of its airspace to foreign aircraft today and evacuated many of its embassies and missions overseas. In terms of the war against terrorism, the United States and Israel are seen by the terrorists and the potential terrorists and the people who would do one harm as partners in this, and so it's perfectly natural for the Israelis to be doubly and trebly on a state of alert today. We've now managed to get the tape of President Bush speaking at Barksdale Air Force in Louisiana on his way from Florida to, as you heard Ann Compton say, somewhere. We assume Washington. And here's what the president had to say when he was in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward. And freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Well, the President could not have spoken more accurately in that final remark there. A great nation is being tested. And the President reassures the nation and anybody else in the world who will hear this that the nation will pass the test. And there is no doubt about that, I think. In the United States of America, as horrible as these incidents are and as tragic as Oklahoma City was, the great strength of the nation, you know, is always there. I recognize that's one man's opinion and doesn't account for the individual shock of individual families or intelligence or military establishments, which have all suffered a grievous blow today in one way or the other. But it does say, I think, what people in most parts of the world believe, that as horrible as this is for the United States and its citizens, the United States continues to be unquestionably the leadership of the world and the example in the world of freedom and democracy. However much one may criticize it, ourselves included, on any given occasion or incident. It's interesting that in Oklahoma today, Governor Keating ordered all state office buildings closed, and the Oklahoma City Police created a one-block perimeter around the jail where Terry Nichols is housed. So again, you have an example of how people's minds work immediately. Was somebody going to try to spring Terry Nichols from jail, or was someone going to attack the jail in which Terry Nichols is housed? But in the wake of Oklahoma City, and based on what's happened this morning, nobody should be surprised. And the Associated Press has done a really good service here by checking with every state in the country so far. As you watch this on the east coast of the United States, think about that in California, all airports were closed. Places like Knott's Berry Farm were closed today. The Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles was closed. The Library Tower, all closed. And the State Emergency Committee convened, naturally under Governor Davis, to see that there was heightened security at all of the state buildings. In Florida, you know what happened. Walt Disney World was evacuated, closed its parks and shopping and entertainment complex. You're talking about the effect that this incident has all across the country. Airports were closed everywhere across the country, as we know, including in Georgia and Illinois, where the Sears Tower was also shut down, in Chicago, and all state government buildings in Chicago and in Springfield, the capital, were closed down. Indiana, all the federal offices were put on alert. In Kentucky, where the southern governors were about to have their full scope of their annual fall conference, it was canceled. And obviously the governors of Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Louisiana, Mississippi all went home to their respective capitals because of this. In Louisiana, where the president has just left, the upper floors of the Capitol building were closed. The offshore oil port, which handles the super tankers in the Gulf of Mexico, suspended operations. And we've said several times this morning that when you think about terrorism, you think about oil supplies, and so that was fairly natural. In Michigan, the tunnel between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, was closed to car traffic, and we do know from other reporting that security was increased at all of the border crossings between U.S. and Canada and between the U.S. and Mexico. But in all the states where there are military bases, including North Carolina, all of the military bases prepared for a possible change in status, and you heard Governor Pataki of New York say a short while ago that the National Guard from various surrounding states will be brought in here to give some sense of relief for the New York City Fire and Police Department, who must just be going through a hellish experience at the moment. John Miller, first of all, you've been on the phone for a little while. Tell me what you got.
Well, as things have developed at the scene, there have been a number of things that have happened. First of all, nobody in city government can right now put a number, even a ballpark estimate on the number of injured and dead. What they've done to try and deal with the large numbers they have is literally brought in students from NYU Medical School to help in the massive triage effort down there. The nearest hospital, Beekman Downtown Hospital, has lost steam power as a result of the explosion, which means they can't sterilize anything. So they've essentially become a MASH center and are feeding people out to other area hospitals.
Another reason to get the National Guard in here quickly, because they come equipped.
Right. Another thing, as New York City hospitals became overwhelmed, ferry boats began to shuttle victims across the river to New Jersey, to hospitals in Jersey City and Bayonne.
We saw, by the way, some ferry boats on the Hudson River a little